My husband left for his final haul on a rainy Tuesday, promising to be home by Sunday for our daughter's 4th birthday. He never made it. Now, 3 years later, I'm standing in front of a massive iron gate, clutching a crumpled newspaper ad, wondering if this is the moment my life finally changes, or if I'm about to lose everything I have left. Stick around to find out how a desperate mother with nothing but $20 in her pocket ended up inheriting a fortune that shocked the entire state. If you've ever felt like the world was against you, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is for you. And tell me in the comments, have you ever received a life-changing sign when you were at your lowest point? I'd love to read your experiences. Part 1. The Echo of Silence. The sound of a heavy truck engine used to be the most comforting noise in the world to me. It meant that Caleb was home. It meant that for the next 48 hours, the bills would be paid, the fridge would be full, and I could rest my head on his shoulder and forget about the rest of the world. Caleb was a long-haul trucker, a man of few words, but a heart as wide as the interstates he traveled. When he died in that pileup outside of Des Moines, the silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just the house that went quiet. It was my entire future. I was 27 years old, a redhead with a face full of freckles and a build that was sturdy but ordinary. I wasn't a model. I wasn't a scholar. I was just Sadie. A woman who had built her whole world around a man who was now gone. We had no life insurance. We had no savings. Everything we made went into our little rental and the dreams we had for our daughter, Mia. After the funeral, Caleb's family, who had always looked at me like a stranger who had stolen their son, vanished. My own parents had passed years ago. I was alone in a way that is hard to describe unless you felt the cold floor of a kitchen at 3 a.m., wondering how you're going to buy milk the next morning. For months, I was a ghost. I took every job I could find in our small town. I scrubbed toilets until my fingernails were brittle and yellowed from bleach. I waited tables at a greasy spoon where the men tipped in pocket change and unwanted comments. I worked until my back felt like it was snapping in two, all for a paycheck that barely covered the childcare for Mia. I remember sitting on the edge of her bed one night, watching her sleep, and feeling a deep, primal fear. I was failing. No matter how hard I worked, the hole was getting deeper. Then I saw the ad. It was tucked in the corner of the local Gazette, squeezed between a sale on tractor parts and a lost dog notice. Companion wanted for elderly gentlemen. No medical experience required. Must be a good listener. Generous compensation for the right soul. It didn't say nurse. It didn't say maid. It said soul. The address took me 30 miles out of town, past the rolling hills and into a private estate hidden behind a forest of ancient oaks. The house was a Victorian masterpiece, all gray stone and soaring turrets, looking like it had been plucked from a different century. My palms were sweating against the steering wheel of my battered old sedan. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My red hair was pulled back in a tight, sensible knot, and my skin looked pale under my freckles. I didn't look like someone who belonged here. When the massive front door opened, I wasn't met by a butler or a stern housekeeper. I was met by a man who looked like he was made of parchment and moonlight. This was Arthur. He was 89 years old, leaning heavily on a silver-topped cane. His eyes a piercing, intelligent blue that seemed to see right through my cheap polyester interview suit. He didn't ask for my resume. He didn't ask if I knew how to check blood pressure. He looked at my hands, red and raw from the cleaning chemicals at my other job, and then he looked me in the eye. "Tell me, Sadie," he said, his voice a low rasp that carried the weight of nearly a century. "Do you know what it feels like to be the only person left in a room full of memories?" I felt a lump form in my throat. I thought of Caleb's empty boots by the door. I thought of the way the house felt too big despite being so small. "Yes," I whispered. "I know exactly what that feels like." Arthur nodded slowly, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Then you're exactly who I've been waiting for. Everyone else who came through that door today was looking at my bank account. You're the only one who looked at me." He offered me a salary that was more than Caleb and I had ever made combined in a year. It felt like a dream, the kind you wake up from right before things get good. But as Arthur led me into his library, a room filled with thousands of books and the scent of old paper and cedar, I realized this wasn't a dream. It was a lifeline. Little did I know, this house and this lonely, brilliant old man were about to weave a story that would change the trajectory of my life and Mia's forever. I was hired to be a companion, but over the next 5 years, I would become the keeper of a legacy I couldn't yet imagine. Part 2. The House of Secrets. Moving into the guest house on Arthur's estate felt like stepping into a dream. For the first time since Caleb's accident, I didn't wake up wondering if we'd be evicted. Arthur was 89, and while his body was frail, his mind was a steel trap. My job was simple. I was his ear. I read him the classics, we played chess, and I listened to stories of a life spent building an empire. But Arthur was a hermit for a reason. He had spent his life surrounded by vultures, relatives who only saw him as a walking bank account. The leader of these vultures was his nephew, Victor, a man with expensive suits and a cold, calculating gaze. Every time he visited, he looked at me and Mia with pure disgust. "Don't get comfortable, Sadie," he whispered to me one afternoon in the hallway. "When the old man breathes his last, you and your brat will be back on the street within the hour. I'll make sure of it." I didn't flinch. Arthur had taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank balance, but by their character. As the years passed, Arthur became more than a boss. He became the father I had lost. He arranged for Mia to attend a private school, giving her a future I could never afford. He saw something in me that I had forgotten existed, a quiet strength. One night, he handed me a heavy iron box. "Keep this safe, Sadie," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't open it until the first Sunday after I'm gone. It's the key to everything." I hid it under my bed, not knowing that this box would soon be the only thing standing between me and total ruin. Part 3. The Final Battle. In the 5th year of my time at the estate, the inevitable happened. Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep. The silence in the house was absolute, but it didn't last long. Within hours, Victor and his lawyers arrived like sharks sensing blood. They didn't even wait for the funeral to be over before they started inventorying the furniture and shouting at me to pack my bags. "The party is over, redhead," Victor sneered. "Pack your cheap suitcases. You have 60 minutes. I stood my ground, clutching the iron box. I remembered every lesson Arthur taught me about the language of the world. On the first Sunday after his passing, as he had instructed, I opened the box. I expected money, but what I found was far more powerful. A digital recorder and a thick blue ledger. It wasn't just a will, it was a dossier. Arthur had been keeping records for 20 years. Every cent Victor had embezzled, every tax law he had broken, and every secret he had tried to bury. The reading of the will was held in the grand library. Victor sat at the head of the table, already acting like the king of the castle. But when the lawyer reached the final clause, the room went ice cold. I leave the entirety of my estate, my holdings, and this house, the lawyer read, his voice shaking, to Sadie Sullivan and her daughter Mia. My biological relatives have already taken their share through the loans documented in the blue ledger. Victor exploded, screaming that I had manipulated a dying man. I simply placed the digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Part 4. The Legacy of the Heart. Arthur's voice filled the room, sharp and commanding, even from beyond the grave. Victor, the recording played. If you are shouting right now, stop. The ledger in Sadie's hand contains enough evidence to put you in prison for a decade. Leave her in peace, or she will hand it to the district attorney. The choice is yours. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Victor and his lawyers practically ran from the house, leaving me standing in the center of the library that was now mine. But the biggest surprise was at the very bottom of the iron box. A small envelope addressed to me. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box and a final note. Arthur hadn't just left me a house. He had bought back the original trucking company Caleb had worked for and renamed it Caleb's Legacy. I thought you might like to see that name on a fleet of trucks one more time, the note read. I sank to the floor and cried, not because I was rich, but because I was finally seen. Today, I still live in the big house, but the gates are always open. The guest house where I once stayed is now a refuge for single mothers who need a second chance. Mia is a confident young woman who knows she is worthy of the world. Every morning, I walk through the rose garden Arthur and I tended together. I'm no longer the ordinary girl from the truck stops. I am the keeper of a legacy. Arthur taught me that loss is a hole that never fills. But if you have the courage to stand your ground, you can build a kingdom around the edges of it. Caleb's trucks are back on the road, and for the first time in a long time, the future looks as bright as the morning sun.